Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are, and welcome to this week's issue of the TADAT Coffee Chat. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, let me give you some context. The Tax Administration Diagnostic Assessment Tool, TADAT, was first developed to sort of offer an objective evaluation of the strengths and limitations that are inherent to a country's tax administration system. And this evaluation is benchmarked essentially against 9 performance outcome areas. And the result of this assessment unveils a scope that is necessary for the reforms that the tax administration needs to go through, and obviously the corresponding priority levels. So the TADAT Coffee Chat series covers those pertinent outcome areas, covers topics that are derived from the country's experiences in those different areas. And today, we look at efficient revenue management in domestic resource mobilization. And this particular performance outcome areas is basically premised on the idea that revenue collection must be, should we say, fully documented, tracked against budget expectations, analyzed in order to inform sound government revenue forecasting and decision-making. And critical in this process is also the timely disbursement of rightful tax refunds to individuals and businesses alike. So this is the context of today's talk. With me today, I am very privileged to be joined by 2 experts with tremendous experience in taxation in Africa. And one of them is Mrs. Mamike Leolo. She is the executive manager of the Macroeconomic Research Unit at the National Revenue and Compliance Management Division of the South African Revenue Service, SARS. And this is essentially the division that is responsible for forecasting the impact of macroeconomic factors on revenue and long-term fiscal trends. So her responsibilities include not only managing economic and revenue analysis, revenue forecasting, publication of various tax statistics bulletin, and interacting regularly with local, regional, and international institutions. And before she joined SARS in 2002 as a risk specialist, she also worked at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and at Eskom. Mamike is a graduate from the University of Limpopo, the Wits Business School, the University of Pretoria, and Henley Business School. Welcome to the show, Mamike. It's a pleasure to have you. My second guest is Mr. Dennis Mukama. He is the Assistant Commissioner for Planning, Research, and Statistics Division at the Rwanda Revenue Authority. Dennis boasts 17 years of experience in tax administration and has held several senior positions, including overseeing statistics at institutional level. And Dennis has been instrumental in ensuring that the tax administration embraces experimental research through partnerships with educational and research institutions. It's good to know that Dennis is also a TADAT trained and has participated in TADAT assessments internally and regionally. He is the focal person on TADAT related issues, including assessments and implementing corrective interventions within the Rwanda Revenue Authority. So amongst your responsibilities is our custody of tax data and designing and monitoring strategy and action plans of the tax administration. He is an economist by trade and holds a bachelor's degree in quantitative economics and a master's degree in economics from India. As you can see, it's quite a mouthful just introducing my speakers today, but welcome, Dennis. I think we're going to jump right into it with the lady in the room. And before I do that, to all of you joining us online, a very warm welcome to you too. This is what I suggest that you do. Grab yourself a cup of coffee and join in the discussions by dropping us, your comments and questions in the chat box. Now, let's jump right into it. Starting with you, Mamike. First thing first. why are efficient, or let me put it this way, why are efficient revenue management processes so important in tax administrations? Why are we even having this conversation?
Thank you, Romeo, and thank you to the TADAT team for the invitation to participate in this TADAT Coffee Chat, the TCC. Just to maybe put up front that most of the content that I'll be presenting today is based on information that's available in official publications, announcements, and presentations, as well as some of the work that has been done jointly between ATF, TADAT, as well as the TADAT and the World Bank on a couple of diagnostic studies that they've undertaken. Also, the presentation that I'll be making will be based on the 2014 and 2020 SARS TADAT diagnostic process and outcomes. So let's come to the question that you've asked, Romeo. Why is it important to have efficient revenue management processes? From SARS perspective, I can sort of offer three dimensions to this. The first one is the mandate of SARS, that SARS serves a higher purpose. We are here to build a solid foundation for sustainable revenue growth. Why? Because in terms of the South African Revenue Service Act, number 34 of 1979, we are, in terms of our key objectives, supposed to efficiently and effectively collect revenue and also efficiently and effectively control over imports, export, manufacture, and movement, storage, and use of certain goods. So it is ingrained in our founding act that we are supposed to be very efficient in collecting revenue. But also with ourselves, how we view the work that we do, and the story about SARS is that everything that we do is all about having transformational impact on the well-being and the lives of people, especially those that are vulnerable amongst us. Sort of if we have to look at statistics and how important is this higher purpose that we're serving, we're looking at impacting over 12,500 staff members who are supposed to help us deliver on this mandate. We've got about 26 million registered individuals, and we serve a population of over 60.6 million individuals. Therefore, our ability to collect revenue and execute on a mandate is quite critical, because there are those amongst us who are highly dependent on a highly efficient revenue service. The third part that I would like to bring in is that SARS has had a unique experience that in the past 4 years, we've had to rebuild ourselves post the state capture. And therefore, we've received lots of focused attention to restore governance integrity, institutional capability, and overall performance of the organizational mandate to collect revenue, improve compliance, and facilitate legitimate trade. So I think as a starting point for us, there is an overall bigger picture of all tax authorities in terms of the mandate that they have to deliver on. But I think specifically for us in SARS, there is a much more bigger push to A, rebuild ourselves, and B, look at the key things that we need to deliver on to help South Africa in general.
Thank you, Mamiki. You speak about how efficient revenue collection is ingrained in SARS's mandate, and in ensuring that tax are accurately assessed, collected, and allocated, which of course cannot be achieved unless you have a well-designed tax revenue accounting system in place. And before I get back to you, Mamiki, let me turn to Dennis for a moment. A well-designed tax accounting system, what does that look like? What would be the must-have components for such a system, according to you?
Yeah, thank you, Romeo. And just like my colleague, let me also thank TADAT for putting this together. And of course, appreciate those who are following us for this TADAT coffee chat. It's always good to exchange ideas. So yeah, we are not so different from what Mamiki just said in terms of how it's ingrained in the Rwanda Revenue Authority. And but coming to your question in terms of, what are the key components as a tax administration or as a part of our mandate of the different tax administrations, including the one that's in RA, there are things that have to ensure, that have to be engraved in the system to make sure that, efficient revenue management systems operate. And among these, as you asked a rightly question, is, what are these efficient tax accounting systems? So one of the things that, you want to have in place to ensure that efficiency is that you should have a tax accounting system that regularly monitors, the collections vis-a-vis the expectations from the government, because that one gives assurances of the different government projects and how they're going to be financed. You don't want to have a situation where the government is, there's a big lap hole in between. There's a big gap between expectations and actual achievements. And then, of course, as tax administration, again, our mandate is not just only to collect the revenues, but also to play that advisory role. So again, as you account and, for these, you're also seeing any potential deviations from the, expectations, and now you inform government what are some of the reasons behind these performances that we're seeing. The other thing is, again, the tax accounting system should have a kind of, a mechanism to reconcile between what the tax administration has and the overall broad government reconciliation, accounting systems. That way it gives a bit of assurances to how government is spending and how some of those are reported back to the tax administration in terms of, in terms of collections. And, so it gives that assurance that, revenues are being accounted for. And then the other one, again, it's you have to have a system that gives assurances to the, not only to the taxpayers, but also to the government through the, constant auditing of the system. It should be audited to ensure that whatever the system actually accounts for the proper, taxes, for the proper, there's no mismatches. People want to have that assurances that the system is actually computing or deducting the appropriate revenues without, and no room for errors. Then maybe on the last note I would want to come to is mainly, again, you spoke to it in your introductory remarks. You should have an accounting system that, in the event that some taxpayers also, have overly paid, legitimately, they should be able to claim their refunds and do that optimally. So that kind of, having all these ingredients will give assurances that, for an effective tax accounting system that in a broad sense would spur or, would enhance efficient revenue mobilization.
Thank you, Dennis. I think that was quite comprehensive. And Mamiki, I don't know if there are some of the components that maybe Dennis didn't touch on that you would like to add on to the questions as the key components that make an efficient tax accounting system.
Yes, thank you, Romeo. Thank you, Dennis, for that. It does cover some ground information on similar things that we do in SARS in South Africa. So I think for us also, if you look at the key components, how we've looked at this particular item is that first we need to be compliant with our reporting standards as per international best practice. So we take cue from the Government Financial Statistics Manuals and Guides, what we call the GFS, Government Financial Statistics, and the GFSM, which is the Government Financial Statistics Manual. And we anchor this based on the System of National Accounts at the SNA. There are also two other manuals that also guide the way other parts of government account for the way we run our books in South Africa, the Balance of Payments and International Investment Position Manual, as well as the Monetary and Financial Statistics Manual. And these are mainly governed in the United Nations and IMF space, but it gives us a global comparative way of being able to account for the money that we report on. Of course, within South Africa, the Constitution, as well as the Public Finance Management Act, the PFMA, gives us some governance structure around how we should be collecting and be accounting and reporting on the revenue that we collect. Like I mentioned earlier on, our Statistical Bureau and our Reserve Bank have national accounts that they need to report on to give a sense of overall picture of South Africa incorporated budget books. What does it look like? What has come in? What was estimated? What has happened? And of course, National Treasury, being part of the ministry that we are part of, the Ministry of Finance, National Treasury does issue out regulations and instructions to sort of give oversight on operational matters that we need to be executing on with regards to our accounting system. So that we sort of have like a cascaded way of making sure that we harmonize how we report and also that there is governance in place. Now, in terms of how we manage our accounting systems, there are four broad categories, or 5 broad categories of taxes that we report on. Taxes on income and profits, taxes on payroll and workforce. In South Africa, it's mostly and mainly skills development levy. We've got taxes on property, so in terms of the sale and acquisition of property, the domestic taxes on goods and services. We've also got taxes on international trade and transaction. I would imagine that this would be a similar arrangement that Rwanda has, but it gives us the framework around which we need to be reporting various line items and make sure that we are consistent about what we report on. So when we speak about our corporate profits have come down, everybody knows that they should then be looking at the same line item in our reports, taxes on income and profits. We also, as SARS, there are some unique things that we're responsible for in terms of the key components of things that we manage in our accounting system. There is some non-tax revenue that we are charged with collecting on. Although we report it as non-tax revenue, it is part of administrative efforts that we need to execute on. And some of this non-tax revenue includes our mineral and petroleum royalties. In the past, we used to collect what used to call mining leases and ownership. Mm-hmm. There are some taxes that we collect also on behalf of other departments, such as our unemployment insurance fund that we collect on behalf of the Department of Labor and the Road Accident Fund for the Department of Transport. So there is quite a huge an array of products and services that we are responsible for administering and therefore reporting on as part of components in our tax revenue accounting system. Back to you, Romeo.
Thank you, Mamiki. And I think listening to you and listening to what Dennis was saying earlier, it appears clear and evident that the successful implementation of a tax accounting system can or should at least lead to improved revenue collection. It should enhance transparency and even go as far as providing better taxpayer services. Is that right? And yet, not all tax administrations have these attributes when you look at it. It might not be the case of SARS or Rwanda Revenue Authority. I'm sure that you've seen that in some parts of the continent. What in your experiences are some of the challenges that tax administrations face in implementing a tax revenue accounting system that is efficient? Maybe I'll start with you, Dennis.
Yeah, thank you. And you're right. Look, the tax administrations, it's key that the compliance generally relies heavily on how taxpayers view the tax system in general. So you may have the mandates and you have the law behind you, and but where we as tax administrations, we're moving away from the authoritative way, and people want to see how are our revenues being managed, and how are they being reported? Any form of threat and worry to them, it actually causes a bit of a harm to the voluntary compliance that we actually strive to get, especially knowing that we are largely limited in resources. You can't go after every taxpayer. It would require lots of resources. So with that, when you have that efficient revenue management system, accounting system, you give the taxpayers the feel that we feel like our resources as collected are being transferred to the government, and then the expenditure again will also influence again how now on the ministry side how these are looked at. But then, like you correctly say, you have all this. We have put in place the accounting systems, but it's not every time by the road a bed of roses. We still have challenges in different tax administrations. Now, in my view, there are a number of things that when you look at that, several tax administrations account for us to have that efficient tax accounting system or revenue accounting system. And one of them, I would say, is what the systems, the availability of systems to the exposure to these tax administrations to use these systems. Look, when you look, I'll give you again an example for the systems that really can encompass all the requirements of an efficient tax accounting system. Now, they are the IT, the software. For instance, there are a number of parameters that you need to consider. It should be having a number of features. It should be able to, give a holistic view of someone's tax account. Taxpayers should be able to access this, their account at any time. They should be able to interface with different, government entities. Now, getting that appropriate system that will serve the purpose. Some tax administrations really are, challenged. In our case, there's a time we are using a system that has also been used by other tax administrations called SIGTAS. SIGTAS had its, its advantages, but it also had its limitations. Now, because of as a tax administration, you're growing, and there's so many demands. Taxpayers want to see their visibility, the amount of data you're taking on, and all. So it could not suffice to give, to play all these roles as we wanted. So we moved on to e-tax, and then so getting the appropriate that serves all the features that are needed for an appropriate accounting system maybe stands as a challenge. And then also there are costs associated to some of these systems. Some tax administration, and I can say a number of them, have been also held hostage to some of the companies that provide the softwares, in that they'll not give you the code, what are they called? The codes. And then you have to rely on them maintaining. So anytime you want to make any change to make the system, feasible and usable and you serve your purpose, integrate with the interface with other systems, then you have to pay.
You're referring to the source codes, the source code there.
Yes. So the tax administration, some of them will not own the systems literally. So every time they need to make a change. So it hinders the efficiency or the implementing that efficient tax account system. Then the other thing is, again, that would hinder probably. We look at the quality of data that is housed in some of most of these tax administrations. You'll find that they're a bit coy of sharing this information with the taxpayers. You don't want to give the taxpayers an account situation that does not really speak to the actual the account status. So because of these challenges of the data, so they cannot implement that proper accounting system. Then the level, of course, of technology interface with other.
I think we've lost Dennis for a few seconds.
With other, in the whole,
Right, please.
Sorry?
You can go ahead. You were frozen for a few seconds, but you can continue.
Okay, oh, sorry. I hope you didn't lose much. But then, of course, so again, also the other thing you find is, there are certain delays in posting, some of the information on the different taxpayer accounts. They pay to the bank. It takes maybe 3-4 days, a week, and the tax administration has already started looking for defaulters, and then they have evidence they paid. So because of the non-interface between some of the facilitating institutions, you find that some administrations are challenged. So once you have a number of these addressed, you enhance the efficiency or the operations of a proper tax accounting system. So I'll leave it at that for now, but I'm pretty sure we'll delve into this further.
Thank you, Dennis. I note that you put a strong emphasis on the digitalization process and the ICT tools that are needed in order to have a sound accounting tax system. Mamiki, is it your same experience from a SARS perspective?
Yes, yes, Dennis has definitely touched on some key touchstones around having an adequate, what they would call in TEDx space, an adequate tax revenue accounting system. So for us, some of the things that we've had to be scored against that we sort of met the test. First of all, is that our accounting system is fully automated, which helps. So having an automated accounting system. We run on the SEP system, and when they tested the system, the overall enterprise-wide system that we run against, that it meets the characteristics expected of a sound tax accounting system. And that in terms of our practice, we do have information and accounting data and practices that meet the standards as set by the various bodies. The other thing that they looked at that they thought was a good thing that exists in SARS is that our systems, our accounting systems, interface with the National Treasury accounting system, which is the basic accounting system, BES. So that also helps in terms of seamless transfer of information from the tax administrator to the ministry. And that in terms of transactions, day-by-day transactions, that all tax liabilities and payments made by taxpayers are posted to a taxpayer account within 1 business day. And we don't necessarily have to deal with a lot of unresolved balances on suspense accounts. So there is much more regular basis upon which our finance team does reconciliation and matching of payments and liabilities to taxpayers' accounts. The other thing that was raised as a positive for us is the integrity of the revenue accounting system, which is secured through both internal and external audits. So it gives not only those who oversee us, but also the general public, South African public, confidence when we do get reports from the internal auditors and as well as external auditors. In our instance, it's the Auditor General that gives a thumbs up to the state of our books and the correctness of our books. It does give some kind of confidence about the accuracy of our numbers and the veracity of the information that we provide from our accounting system.
Thank you, Mamiki. And I think having a clear understanding of these challenges certainly has helped both your revenue authorities to navigate them, to navigate the difficulties effectively, which is to a great extent, what the TADA tool does. And now I want us to talk about another indicator, which has to do with revenue authorities' contribution to the government's tax revenue forecasting process. First of all, let me say this. This is traditionally seen as a task which rests with policymakers in ministries of finances and et cetera. But why do revenue authorities participate in tax revenue forecasting? Why is it important for them to be a part of that process?
I'm assuming you're asking me. Sorry.
Yes, the floor is with you, so you can go ahead, Mamiki, and then I'll bring in Dennis at some point.
Okay, so I think maybe again to start from our bigger purpose as an institution that I had also indicated earlier on, that we exist to serve a higher purpose of enabling government to build a capable state that fosters sustainable economic growth and social development that serves the well-being of all South Africans. Now, which means that conversations that happen around the work that we do, it will probably be incomplete if you don't have a picture of the executing agency that's supposed to make sure that, you know, we have a capable state that has the necessary funding that will catapult economic growth and social development and take care of those that are vulnerable in society. And therefore, this is how SARS would become involved in the forecasting process. What we also do is that because we believe in the theory of compliance that says that most taxpayers are honest and simply want to fulfill their obligations with the least amount of effort, we need to put in place a very robust compliance model that can make sure that the revenue that is coming through voluntarily from taxpayers comes in without any hassles, without any problems, with the best service. But that the money that is supposed to come through that is not there because people are not complying, that we bring in all the necessary resources to secure the revenue that we can then go back to government and say, see what SARS has done to make sure that those who are not compliant have brought in the revenue despite the economic conditions. So that will be the second reason why we would have to be part of the conversation, to say there is money that does not come in voluntarily. There's money that we have to actively go out, spend resources, spend time, spend efforts to make sure that it is secured and it is in the fiscus. Now, in terms of, so we've sort of dealt with the why part of it. And in South Africa's instance, the process that we embark on to be part of the forecasting process is that we've got a committee called the Revenue Analysis Working Committee, and it is a peer-based committee. We provide economic and technical inputs into determining the consensus-based estimates of revenue collections. And we do this before in preparation for our budget cycles. So we review our budget mid-year towards September, October, and then we have the minister announcing the budget in February, full budget in February. So in between those times, we meet as this Revenue Analysis Working Committee composed of senior officials from the following institutions: South African Revenue Service. Obviously, some of my team members are involved with this and my principals are involved with this. We've got representatives from the National Treasury, obviously as part of the big ministry. We've got representatives from the South African Reserve Bank, obviously from giving a perspective with the lens of their perspective, their expertise with regards to macroeconomic matters. And how the RAP process unfolds in South Africa is that we have SARS presenting the year-to-date revenue collections. So we sort of give a status update as to what is happening in terms of revenue collections and why and where and who. Well, not the details of who, but which segments, which sectors, etc. And we also have Treasury presenting the economic forecasts that underpin the economic policy forecast. So it sort of gives us currently and into the future, where does Treasury see the economic fortunes unfolding. We then have a deliberation amongst ourselves. We present each taxpayers, we present our view for each taxpayer and for each tax product that we administer, and then we take a consensus view. So we then say for each tax product line, these are the different estimations from the various institutions, what are the reasons, and we sort of take, based on the evidence presented by the various institutions, we take a consensus view for each of the tax lines that we administer. Obviously, this number gets presented through to the budget office, who have to take into consideration the fiscal envelope, They would obviously have discussions with the deputy minister and the minister, and have a sense of whether it is still in line with the expected flow of revenue is still in line with the overall key fiscal indicators or fiscal ratios, and the minister would then announce the budget accordingly. Just a couple of things that I just want to highlight in terms of practicalities of how we do it. We all have revenue forecasting methodologies. Most of them are similar. So most of you would be familiar with things like your regression methodologies. So most of you would be familiar with buoyancy methodologies. Most of you will be familiar with trend methodologies. So a lot of us do have base methodologies that are similar. Probably the differences that would come in terms of each of the text products that we sort of have focused on is how we treat the dummy variables, how we treat once-offs, how we treat a forward view of certain events that we see happening that could potentially have an impact on future revenue flows. So what's the basis of some of our revenue forecasts? We do need to look at a lot of tax and economic data in order for us to come up with informed views on model inputs. We want to have a sense of what's happening in terms of tax elasticities, where there are changes in revenue in response to national income, changes in economic conditions, whether it's the structure or the growth, changes of inflation and price changes, macroeconomic environment, changes in the different tax bases, trade flows, business income, transactions on goods and services, and the growth or contraction in demand for goods that are subject to excise tax. And we do have a view of the current year, and we take a view of the forward year. So when TADAT did an evaluation in terms of this particular piece of work of efficient revenue management, but particularly in the space of contributing to tax revenue forecasting process, they did say that they are quite impressed with the fact that SARS contributes and routinely monitors monitors and reports on and provides inputs to government in terms of the budgeting process. So I think that does give us a bit of a positive tick in terms of us meeting some of the key things that constitute acceptable or better than efficient tax administration when it comes to this particular item. I think I'll pause here and see if there's anything else that Dennis may want to add.
Yes, certainly. We'll bring it back in a few minutes, Mamiki. I just want Dennis to answer the same question, starting with why revenue authorities get involved in revenue forecasting in the process. And perhaps if you can also go into what Mamiki touched on a little bit, the way that the whole process is structured within the South African environment. She mentioned some of the base methodologies that they use. Perhaps you can touch on that a little bit from a Rwanda perspective.
Yeah, thanks. And again, Mamiki, I think there's a lot in terms of the processes and procedures, how it's done. We are more or less in line, knowing from the fact that actually we got a lot of expertise from the SARS. We had, a capacity resourced from SARS. So, it may be going back to the aspect of why it is important for the tax administrations to be part of the whole revenue process forecasting process. Look, it's we know that the ministries generally the mandate falls on the ministries of finance and but when you look at some of the aspects and if you've those of us that have encountered and come in close proximity with working with the ministry, they look they're more driven by the macro aspects of the economy. So you'll find that the models they have will speak a lot to the macro aspects, to the levels of inflation, to the unemployment and all these, but they they do not have this micro aspect in terms of effects and drivers of the tax administration. And I would also want to come back to Mamiki's submission in that, when it comes to the administrative initiatives that the tax administration has put in place to make sure that those revenues come, but not only voluntarily, these aspects and how they've been quantified, often at large, the ministries do not look at that low details. So you need, a tax administration to come up with, that knowledge, that information to share with the, with the ministry, that, much as we're talking of terms of revenue forecasting at the macro level, these indicators speaking this ABCD, there is these aspects that are coming from the administrative initiatives, which need to be incorporated. And that's why when you look at most of the tax administration, they will have various models that bottom up. They will look at the tax statistics and build the forecasts from the bottom going upwards to the macro level. The other thing is, again, in terms of who understands the tax data. That is a basis for a lot of revenue forecasting. The tax administration is in a much better position, in a much better place to offer insights into what the information, what the tax data says. So the Ministry of it may have access to information, but they will not know, how the audit came, how the debt enforcement was, all these things. You need someone who's on the ground. And then even the aspects that we speak to in terms of the behavior of taxpayers. When you implement these different policies, when you implement these different admin measures, how the tax-paying community and stakeholders will behave. I think the person who is in close proximity with them will have a better understanding of how the behavior is going to change, and ultimately how we are going to see that translate into tax revenue. So all these aspects give the tax administration a very key backing to be part of this discussion when it comes to revenue forecasting. Now, in terms of the process, I guess we are not so different, like I said, with what SARS does. And like I said, we call on a lot of support from SARS, which I hope that tax administrations do. We've also now gone to the extent of also offering similar support to the sister revenue authorities. So in terms of, we will use the information at our disposal in terms of tax revenues, the preceding years, what are the coefficients, elasticities, and and then we built all these models that, can be fed based on the historical data, based on the different assumptions that we have in terms of, the admin measures we're going to put in place, what are the policy instruments that are coming up that will in fact influence or affect our tax collections. And then, what are also borrow some of the macro parameters to see that in case these parameters are changing, how does that speak to the revenue expectations? So we've developed over almost close to 6 models that look at different aspects. And so those models, looked at, brought together to see that, with the outcomes of each model, and then compared, and then see to give you an ideal picture. Because relying on one model may be a bit limiting. You may, you may be misled by it missing out on the macro aspects. Yet your model maybe is focusing on the central, on the micro taxpayer information that you have. Yet you may also want to, so there are several models that we've developed, and I'm pretty sure a lot of that Manik has spoken to. So, and again, now we will engage the ministry. We'll have outcomes, we'll have a committee, we'll sit with the ministry, they'll provide their models, we challenge them, they'll challenge us. We, it is a back and forth. And it's actually, for us, it's something that will last for close to even a week, and then, and then eventually they will, make the decision, but of course, considering a number of the inputs that we provided. Thank you.
May I just add something? Romeo,
Yes,
is fine.
absolutely. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I think also probably partially in response to some question that has been posted on the chat box. So what we also do in SARS is that the very same official process that I was explaining earlier on between ourselves, Treasury and the Reserve Bank as officials that we meet through what we call the Revenue Analysis Working Committee, we also mimic this particular process internally within SARS. And why it's important for me to mention this is also because how we have designed ourselves as SARS is that we've got geographic points of presence. So in each province, we have offices, tax offices, excise offices, customs offices, points of entry, or service center, or processing centers, assessment centers. And all of these offices or points of presence in the regions give us a sense of, from the coal face, what's going on. In this region, in this town, in this locality, are we hiring more people? Are we seeing people being retrenched? Are we seeing more offices being built, more manufacturing plants being built? And how does that translate into revenue? How does it translate to revenue now? How does it translate into revenue into the future? So we sort of get a cold face perspective of what's going on. We also have various specialists that deal with different aspects of administration, whether it's from the legal side, policy side, product design, the engineers that look at our processes, the segment specialists that go deep into a particular segment or a tax product, sector specialists. They all give us a complement, and then the guys that deal with risk, the guys that deal with enforcement in its entirety of the value chain, from verification all the way to criminal prosecution or criminal investigation. All of these stakeholders give us a sense of what's happening now and what's going to happen in the future. What are the immediate revenue gains that we're going to see, and what are where are the risks that we see? So it also gives us a strong evidence-based way of engaging to say, based on the internal inclusive collaborative processes, based on the multi-layer analysis of taxes, sectors, segments, regions, and also based on the compliance efforts that we commit to. So you'd see in our annual performance plan and our strategic plans, we do make commitments to say, we know money is going to come through from how we've designed our taxes, our fiscal policy design, and we know money will come through how we extract based on how well we execute the legal instruments that are available for us, and that constitutes probably a huge portion of the voluntary revenue that comes through. We make a commitment in the APP to say, this is how much we are saying SARS will bring in through these dedicated efforts in SARS to bring in revenue that otherwise would not have come through had we done nothing. We also do comparison of ourselves to our peers. So we say tax authorities whose economic size looks like South Africa, tax authorities whose sector intensity looks like South Africa, or in terms of pastel dynamics looks like South Africa's socio economic, political dynamics, and tax authorities who may be falling within certain unions or committees that look like us. What are the expected growth rates? What are the expected drivers? So we always comparing ourselves to just see, are we in line with our international peers? That gives us a very sound basis upon which we can then go to the minister and say, these are the kind of these are the kind of commitments that we can make as SARS. We have something that we call the tax revenue management system, where we say tax revenue outcomes are as a result of, first of all, the tax policy, the economic activities. Tax revenue is a consequence of, secondly, public confidence in SARS government, quality of sense and sense of benefits, so how taxpayers behave. And thirdly, tax outputs are as a result of how well, as a tax administrator, we run our institution, whether we act with integrity, how well we run our compliance program, and the capacity and capability that's available to execute. And what we have done over a few years now is that you'll see in our annual report, we report this, and like I'm saying, we explicitly commit for it in the annual performance plan, that because we track something called the Compliance Revenue Program. And that Compliance Revenue Program has roughly accounted for between 10 to 15% of the total revenue take. Last year, we collected about 232 billion, which is represented about 14% growth on the previous year. And sort of to just give a sense of what are the key things that we do. So if we accept that the economy will generate what the economy does, we then are saying that SARS has an ability to influence and shape revenue performance, utilizing aspects that is in its control and partnering with others to ensure that we've got a conducive environment for optimal tax revenue collections. For those who sort of read books such as Grade by Choice, you know, they always say things like, it's difficult to predict the future. And the only way to predict the future is by creating the future that one seeks. So what we do is we literally say, these are the things we're gonna follow up on to make sure that we secure the revenue. And some of the things that we focus on is making sure that we tighten our risk management processes. So when returns come in, we need to make sure that all the risk rules are updated and they fire and they pick up taxpayers that should be dealt with and should not be receiving the refunds and are adequately dealt with. Our debt collection efforts, we sharpen it every year. We learn from the best around the world to make sure that we bring down our debt book and we bring in the cash from debt collection efforts. There's many other things that are in the compliance revenue program that we speak about, and those that are part of this broadcast are more than welcome to go into our annual report, have a look, and if you want us to unpack it a bit, and if you want to see best practice, what we do in SARS, we are more than willing to share the learnings from that. Thank you.
I think it's a conversation that we definitely will need to have, but it's quite interesting that both on the SARS side of things and on the Rwanda Revenue Authority, that interagency cooperation plays a key role. And to a certain extent, it announces the transparency, you know, also in the forecasting process. I just want to spend a couple of minutes on the question that was asked on the chat by Habe. He says, Dennis has already said that efficient revenue system is not just about raising the tax only, but it is also about minimizing the burden of compliance on taxpayers, and adoption of ICT is the most vital thing in this. And he goes on to ask, how is it going to be adopted and used in future, in the future of the data era as a business process re-engineering? So he wants you to shed some light. I think you touched a little bit on that when we were talking about the accounting system, you know, the utilization of real-time data sources when possible to capture the most current economic and taxpayers' activity. This is something that definitely can enhance the accuracy of short-term revenue projections. Your thought, Dennis?
I like the question, and I think it really throws more light and throws more light in terms of where we're heading as tax administrations. You know, we are digitizing, we are moving into that direction, and the very purpose is to change the way we do things. I'll start this with an example. When in the tax in Nare, I remember when before a large moving towards the automation and digitization, you could see some of the way we were setting out our activities. And, when I look back, I even, say, how did we manage to achieve this? I'll give you just a simple example when you're talking of like audit, so one of the things that we do as a tax administration is to verify that the submissions are actually accurate or people have submitted. And one of the tools that you use is audit. Now, that time back in the day, I think the audit was given in terms of arbitrary number, percentage of taxpayers. You say, this year we target audit 0.02% of the taxpayers. Now, that is in a way is, is a hazard, then you start, so you may catch some, you may not catch some, and, operating that way with no guidance, because of lack of what to work with, the information to work with. But as we moved into digitizing, getting all the taxpayer information, bringing these electronic fiscal invoices on board, and automating the systems to speak to each other, now you're able to build risk rules to inform the audit process. You don't just go out auditing and say, okay, target is 0.5. But where are the risks? So you're able to build the risks within the system to show you where to put your effort. If someone has been a frequent importer, you see them importing the customs, but you don't see the same people reflected in the domestic taxes. You don't have an income tax account. They're not paying any kind of profit tax or anything. It flags. What are they doing? But without that, that information to speak to each other, you're not able to get the benefits. Taxpayers don't want you to just come to arbitrarily to their doors and you have come to audit what? Why have I been selected? Why? And that's, I think, why Mimiki is saying, you have that compliance improvement plan based on all these aspects. So now it's vital that, so already that shows you how we are moving from, as tax administrations, just from, moving in blindfolded, but now into a stage where you're informed by information data, technology, and and again now where we are heading again is things like information and all these developments in IT, ICT, things like predictive analysis. You should be able to predict a taxpayer's behavior from what you're seeing and their patterns of behavior, and then you can predict that maybe in the next 4 years, this particular taxpayer is going to become a non-filer, is going to become a nil filer, is going to disappear. What do we do as a tax administration right now to make sure that we stop that stage from happening? So you're able to look at, if they've been if they've been paying 100%, they've been complying and paying them, then now suddenly after 2 years, they are, paying half. Then next year, they're not, they start not reporting on time. So already these are signs that show you that there is something, a pattern that we're developing. And you're relying a lot on AI, on, systems to give you that kind of, and project the likely behavior. When you look at we are having the fiscal devices in Rwanda, and which are now, so every receipt has to be backed by an invoice. So you're able to, rather than, merely, it matches its voluntary compliance, but the system is able to now more or less, pre-populate the invoice, the returns of the taxpayer before they submit, and also give them that, look, in your self-submission, you gave this much of tax, but in your electronic fiscal invoices, it's this much. You may want to do a cross-check. And this is, in a way, you're also facilitating your, your taxpayers. And they also have visibility of what's happening. So they can easily cross-check without necessarily having to place a burden on them and then throwing fines to them. So all these things, I think, on reliance on information, ICT, and ensuring that they speak and inform the courses of action. AI, there's a lot of talk of the AI and where it's going, and even tax administrations stand to benefit from the AI. One of the challenges, I don't know how it is in SARS or these other tax administrations, but many of our tax administrations within the region, one thing that we've been grappling with is the rate at which we manage taxpayer correspondences. We write to the tax administration, they try to inquire, but the response rate is not, as it should be. But, you embrace AI, it is packed with a lot of information. It can provide responses right on time for taxpayers if well managed. So why can't the tax administrations, benefit from all this kind of IT? So so I like the question. And going forward, I think we are moving more into an age where tax administration activities are being informed more by the data, by the systems, as opposed to, tax officers chasing all around the people and creating unnecessary inconveniences to their operations. So so we are moving toward that side.
If I can add something, Romeo.
Yes, I expected you to, Mamiki. Please go ahead.
Okay. So I think Dennis is absolutely spot on, absolutely. And a lot of us as tax authorities are working towards getting full maturity with what we call tax administration 2.0, where the world is now preparing itself. It's for tax administration 3.0 and the digital identification of taxpayers. Now, what does that include? It means we're linking public systems and private systems with taxpayers' natural systems to enable trusted remote connection required for seamless taxation. So essentially, we will be doing web scraping or data scraping of all the activities that you're embarked on as a taxpayer, and we are able to get a sense of what's the taxable amount that you should be paying, given all of this information that we're getting. And we're seeing a growth in what we call unstructured data, both structured and unstructured domestic and international data. So high frequency data, new sources and innovative sources of data, like I said, web and data script. So all of this information, third-party information, allows us to be a lot more alert about your activities and the tax consequences of that. So that by the time you get to engage with us, there's very little information that you're going to tell us that we don't already know about yourself, which means that there's a very little for you to be interacting. In fact, one of the things that the commissioner would normally say when he sort of speaks about the future of SARS is that we want to be in a position where by the time the taxpayer wakes up and says, I should be thinking about SARS, they don't need to be, because SARS would have done all of that we, almost like no service is best service, because you would know all the key things that clarified what your tax obligations are. You would know how to interact with the platforms, would give you the best service, and would make sure that we close the gap in terms of delivering best service and dealing with risks that are inherent in managing a tax administration system, so that by the time you get to think about SARS, it's a non-event, because we would have dealt with many of the things, many of the interactive and iterative processes that normally lead to frustrations, and that a lot of it will be captured through this AI data, big data, being able to put all of this together through a very efficient tax administration body. Yeah.
Thank you, Mamiki. This is quite exciting listening to both of you talking about it, but I also know that from the perspective of adopting ICT, Rwanda and SARS are, at a relatively advanced level compared to some of the other tax administrations of the continent. It will be interesting to see also where already there exists the policy and legislative framework already that will be conducive to the adoption of these new technologies. I think that will form part of a different conversations that we can have. Because you started mentioning that, I want us to now look at a further indicator of efficient revenue management, which is the adequacy of the VAT refund system. Because certainly there too, technology and digitalization are going to play a key role, because designing an efficient value-added tax system, a refund system specifically, naturally would involve creating, streamlined processes, ensuring that there's timely and accurate refunds for eligible businesses and individuals. All of that, to prevent fraud and misuse. Now, in your view, what would be the ideal design, keeping in mind the discussion we've just had now about technology and digitalization? What would be the ideal design for a VAT refund system that would operate at optimal level? Dennis.
Yeah, thank you. Again, now this one for me, it's a bit of a, I know we don't stand so well in terms of our taxpayers when it comes to refund process, but it doesn't mean that necessarily we should not have the prerequisites of having an ideal refund system. We have how those have been implemented and how they're being used is another question, but at least so I'll go to some of the things that I believe should should incorporate an ideal VAT refund system. One, we need to have something that a system that will because when you talk of the VAT refund system, it speaks to those people that have overpaid their taxes legitimately and need to be refunded and refunded promptly. So you should be able to have a system that is able to, first and foremost, to cross-check or subject some of these refund applicants to a kind of a cross-check to make sure that they are legitimate. They need to be in the registry of that particular tax, and particularly this goes to VAT. It's the one that is frequently, that where refunds apply. So people, I don't know, most tax administration will operate in such a way that VAT taxpayers are required to register as VAT taxpayers, and so doing, start charging the VAT, and then they withhold that and pass it on to government or to the tax administration. So there are people who will do this particularly to make sure they beat the system, to make sure that they floss the system, reclaim refunds illegitimately. And that's why I like the language of Tadat, that every time it will always talk of legitimate VAT refunds. So in a way, again, for efficient system, you need to make sure that you have a cross-checking system to make sure that whoever is registered to be, say, VAT registered taxpayers is not a bogus taxpayer. We usually use the word bogus because those are that want to beat the system. So you may want to have and I'll tell you that we have been as a Rwanda Revenue Authority, and we've had even despite even embracing employing IT to try and beat away. Still, there are people who will come into the system. They'll purchase a very a genuine fiscal device that that gives the receipts that are genuine, and then they know the system will cross-check within itself to make sure that whatever invoice whoever is claiming the VAT invoice, a refund, has a genuine invoice. So their job is to really sell these invoices to whoever wants to claim. So you can see to what extent they are willing to go so as to try and beat the system. So you need to make sure that the system in itself has a way in which to to weed out this kind of fictitious registrants. Then again, the other thing is you should be able to have a system that uses or something would call like inbuilt risk assessment kind of software, to review some of these claims, so that those that against a certain criteria. If you have exporters that they're either compliant and again these different taxes, income tax and what, the system should be built around risks, so that in case you're going to have a proper functioning VAT refund system, it can easily detect the level of risk to the claimants. There's always before you used to have a blanket kind of a refund system that whoever on this threshold, if you're below a certain threshold, automatically you're given a refund. But not necessarily that because I've claimed certain amount that is small does not make me a legitimate refund claimant. Even amongst those, there are those that are actually hiding so that they beat the system. So what are the risks associated? And who do you pay first anyway, even if you're going to pay? If say you've cleared so many refund claims that are legitimate, who do you pay first? Should we also use risks to say, no, this needs to be paid first because we have a limited, a kind of a limited budget. So, the risk aspect has to come into play. And then again, to make sure that the refund system is efficient and up and running, we need to consider even to government. Are we able to pay interests on delayed legitimate claims? So, I mean, that also instills confidence within the taxpaying community that, much as if I delay to pay taxes, I am penalized. Interest and all these other penalties come and apply. But what if it comes to government? So when they delay to pay my refund, are legitimate, and so they should have some kind of a penalty system applicable to them as well. How, to what extent this is applied, of course, is another topic for discussions. And then maybe something finally is to also ensure the level of availability of refunds. It's one thing having the system in place, but it's also another to have the refunds. The funds to support or to pay out these legitimate claims. So some tax administrations, like us, at the moment, we are, we retain a certain level of VAT collections and put aside to pay refunds. As we speak now, I think we retain 15% of the VAT collections, so to pay back the refund claims. But others have gone to as far as having and I think this is also what that would always push for, is to try and forecast refunds so that an appropriate budget is availed for legitimate refund claims. So so in a nutshell, those are the kind of broad aspects I speak to. But of course, like we said, a number of these will definitely be better put to use if they have supporting IT, you have the appropriate data, you have systems that speak to each other, so that you have factual information you're working with as you're just setting up the refund system. Thank you, Dennis.
And I note that there's a huge emphasis on the role that the risks play, in an efficient and optimal VAT refund system. You've basically implemented a risk-based approach to approvals, for example, where refunds claims that have lower risk factors are fast-tracked for quicker processing. So risk is quite critical. Even in the pre-audit checks that you conduct, before the refund is processed, you make sure that this involves reviewing claims and against predefined criteria that you've just explained, and conducting random audits to verify the accuracy. I think risk plays a critical role, and of course, the timely payment, right? Which means confidence, from the taxpayer vis-a-vis the Revenue Authority, and therefore, in turn, voluntary compliance. Do you think that those factors also play a critical role in your environment, Mamiki? And also, I want you to maybe touch on the question that is asked by someone there in the chat. I think it's Antonio, who's asking, which one is better? I'm not quite sure how to define better in this context, but which one is better, income tax or value-added tax? If you can touch on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So in relation to the question that you asked earlier on, so we also work of refunds, tax returns that generate potential for a payment of a refund are subjected to an automated risk-based verification system. So from both the VAT side as well as the customs side, we do have some kind of upfront validations that we do. And once the return goes through the system, if where there is a credit, so a refund is due, and there's no risk identified and no other reason exists for the refund to be stopped, then the payment is made immediately. And with regards to us as SARS, we make an explicit provision in the budget in our forecasting process for payment of refunds. So collectively, as the Revenue Analysis Working Committee would say, based on these economic reasons, or based on the fact that your credit book, your overall credit book looks like this, SARS, and based on maybe new events that we're seeing, maybe a rise in imports, or more capital projects being built, or more capital imports coming through, or more of commodities being exported, all of these things that would probably accelerate the rate at which VAT refunds are being claimed, we then make the necessary adjustment to the envelope to make sure that refunds do go out. SARS does offset excess VAT credits against the arrears or the debt of other core taxes, and we do pay interest on delayed refunds. And just to quote something that the Commissioner also presented to our Parliamentary Standing Committee on Finance, just how do we manage VAT and how do we make use of all of these technologies and information and third-party data to be able to go back to South Africa public and say, we do our best when we say we've released so much refunds, because we would have made sure that we protect in terms of the risks that Dennis has mentioned, but also we service in making sure that refunds that are due do go out and go back into the economy so that the vendors can use those funds to create more economic opportunities. So last year, we received about 4.3 million returns, and they were processed as follows. So the 4.3 million returns were assessed through the tax processor. So there's a data and machine learning algorithms that it goes through. About 3.9 of those returns were resolved through the automated risk assessment, and there were no further interventions. So they were paid out. And then only about 451,000 or 10% were selected by the risk engine for further verification. This means of the 10, if you had to sort of scale it down to 10, of the 10 that were processed, 9 were processed without any intervention and 1 was selected for verification. And of that 1, 75% were completed within 21 working days, which is what we commit to in terms of our service charter. And more than half of these cases selected by the risk engine came from habitual non-compliant vendors. And if you sort of look at how much we saved, the yield from the VAT risk management, which is about 41 billion rands. And we also, on top of that, not only did we protect the fiscus from all of these shenanigans, but we secured about 54 successful criminal prosecutions for VAT contravention. So it is something that we constantly have to sort of keep a balance between managing the risk and providing the necessary service. So to the question that was asked around VAT and income tax, which is better, it's quite a difficult one to answer, because when you're sort of testing what is a good tax system. So at some stage, we introduced the Judge Davis tax committee to take a review of the state of South Africa's tax systems and to sort of give us advice and give Treasury advice, give us SARS administrative advice as to where we are and what's working, what's not. So some of the things that they tested against is neutrality of the tax system. It must produce sufficient income, but with minimum distortions to the economy. It must be simple to administer, easy to understand, be able to collect, convenient, and then stability. It must stay stable to support the macroeconomic stability, and then revenue adequacy, that it must raise enough revenue for government to meet its objectives. Now, in South Africa, when we sort of test some of our tax products against those 4 dimensions that I mentioned, we find that VAT is efficient, is mildly progressive, not quite fully, but mildly transparent, and to a certain extent, certain and buoyant. So it does sort of respond to how the underpinning economic activities do. Personal income tax is probably the most transparent, the most certain. There's equity enhanced by capital gains tax, and it's progressive by design, and tax expenditure measures complement the redistributive role. So if we sort of had to compare VAT to personal income tax, our personal income tax design is probably a bit more robust in terms of its design, which is similar to corporate income tax. Although South African corporate income tax, there are so many exceptions and deductions and allowances that were given to certain industries because of our historical past, but that's another question for another day. Our other taxes, custom duties, relatively efficient, but it's not so much a progressive, transparent and buoyant. So I think if you had to sort of compare those from South Africa's perspective, our income taxes tend to be a bit more better in terms of design. VAT is probably efficient, but in terms of design, income taxes are better.
Thank you. And the more efficiently designed your VAT system is, the more it minimizes, the administrative burdens, reduces the risk of fraud, and enhances compliance. But we also know that, and maybe for a second, I want you to wear a different hat, Dennis. You've conducted TADAT assessments in various countries across the continent. We know that for many tax administrations, providing timely VAT refunds continues to pose a challenge. Why is that?
Yeah, no, very serious question, and it also applies to us as in Rwanda. I cannot shy away from the fact that we also still have challenges in paying the VAT refunds, despite knowing what to do on that. So there are so many, I think, a number of factors that come into play here, and some we've already touched, but I'm happy to go back and throw more light in this particular angle. So one of the things that, and one of the biggest challenges anyway, is the funds availability. The availability of the funds to pay up all these legitimate refund claims poses a challenge. And I think that's why, there are so many questions, even the TADAT itself questions the way some of the budget apportionment to VAT refund, because like I said, we use the retention mechanism. We retain a certain amount of the VAT, and several other tax administrations do that. So if you're retaining 10%, and then the refund the refund claims exceed that, gives you a gap. And now getting the budget to pay up the gap becomes a bit of a problem. Sometimes what if you retain a 10% and the claims are 5%? That means you're denying the government that extra 5 to be used and spent for other development programs. So, but the biggest challenge that I've seen is mainly to do with the funds availability. Despite the tax administration doing what they have to do the due diligence to ensure that these are legitimate claims and there's so much that's being claimed, then they have to turn to the ministry or to the government to cover up provide the budget, and they're also struggling to get the budget. So that's one of the things. That's one of the challenges I see that's holding back the different tax administrations in timely payment of the VAT refund. The other thing that it comes to mind, that I've seen, or at least we've experienced, is the availability of systems. Now, some of these tax administrations are still either not digitized enough, and I come back to the fact that digitization plays a role. How you impart your risk assessment, how you around the VAT refund mechanism plays a big role. A number of them still go through the manual verification of each and every claim. Now, doing that sends more work, more time into verifying the legitimacy of the claims. Some of these things that could have actually been done, or you could have been automated, So that again pushes some of these tax administrations not to, address the whole process on time. And even when the claims are clear, there's still that back and forth and saying, who do we pay first? Again, so those, people are kept on the waiting list, which is not good for, either the tax administration or the business community in general. So, and then the number of options available to support the payment of these refund claims. Some of these tax, yes, we verified that they are legitimate claims, you have to pay, but we only limited in the method we're using to pay up. We only say we're going to pay, from our budget to your account. But the other options, you cannot, why don't you let the taxpayer claim or offset these claims off another tax site? Some of them are still rigid. They say, no, you'll only claim that based on the VAT, but you could, we have your income tax that you overpaid. Why can't we, reallocate this and offset off using this? So that, may also delay the whole process. And then, and again, also the fact that, some tax administrations do not, have not ventured into the fact that they should also take responsibility when it comes to delay in payment, that they apply an interest on themselves. When that fact that you're going to pay an interest on outstanding VAT refund claims will also probably, in a way, push you to make sure that you pay these refund claims as soon as possible, so you're not, penalized as government or your tax administration. But the fact that some do not apply this, it's, you don't have the urgency to push through in terms of paying the refund is a bit, it's a bit undermined. So if you apply, if you put the legal framework, administrative operations around paying the interest on outstanding VAT refund claims unpaid, that in a way would also spur to expedite payment of some of these refund claims. So these are things I've had a chance to witness in different tax administrations, and I think they pose challenges on the timeliness of paying the others, but I think these have been more the outstanding that I've had a chance to encounter. So yeah, I'll submit on that.
Thank you very much. We have just about 4 minutes left, but I want to do justice to a question the last question that we have on the chat box, which says, what are some effective strategies for broadening the tax base? Can I give you each 1 minute to cover that? Namiki, you want to go first?
Okay. So just to quickly talk about the refund story, just to say that from SARS' side, not only are we keeping track of all of the complaints that come through from taxpayers where there's suspicious activity, etc. You'd see in our April media statement, we did actually issue out an alert to say we are seeing a lot more people asking to register to be VAT vendors with the intention of defrauding the state. And we had to put measures in place to make sure that we deal with that effectively. But if you wanted to see whether we are doing our job as well, there is something called the Office of the Tax Ombuds. And the Tax Ombuds looks at all tax affairs that have been escalated by the taxpayer who deems to not be satisfied with the work done by SARS. And there it also clearly indicates that there's a lot of people who quickly go to the Tax Ombuds without having dealt with things that SARS has asked for. If we ask for supporting documents, etc., comply with that so that it's easier for us to run through our risk system and be able to pay out your refunds. So there are checks and balances in place. But in terms of where do we see opportunities for expanding our tax base? I think for us, first of all, is through the use of third-party data to be able to reach those that are formally trading but have not registered with us, and also to touch those that are informally trading or underground or wherever, that we can start seeing through third-party data ability to track their economic activities, whether they swipe their cards, whether they're buying things, or where they're located, etc. We're able to look at that. In terms of e-commerce, we now see that the growing digital economy and e-commerce and gig economy presents opportunities for taxation that perhaps didn't exist 10 years ago. So that's the one area where we can sort of broaden our tax base. We do know that things like international taxes, transfer pricing, trade mispricing, undervaluation fraud does also open up opportunities for us to look at taxpayers and traders who perhaps have sort of hidden below the radar that we can now see and be able to collect taxes for them. Illicit economy, including the illicit financial flows, is also another area that provides opportunities for broadening our tax base. I'll submit to you, Romy.
Thank you. Dennis, opportunities for broadening the tax base?
Yeah, thanks. And I'll also be as brief as possible. So one of the things I see that actually hinders broadening the tax base is some of the legal provisions, because the tax base will only grow in as far much as the legal framework specifies and clarifies who's supposed to be in the registry. So if it's ambiguous, it's not clear, then definitely you're going to be grappling with the whole aspect of who goes into what. So once that is clarified, I think by just clarifying the legal framework, you can obtain mileage on broadening tax base. I'd also want to concur with Mimik in terms of utilization of third-party data. I'll not go into that because as much as you're pushing for registration, it's the quality of the registration that you want, not just the numbers, but actual taxpayers. And then third is again use of policy. This time in terms of you can broaden your tax by just broadening the applicable products for which the tax is applicable. Say if you're talking of excise tax, which is specific to a number of products, you can broaden the product range without necessarily changing the rate, without necessarily changing the numbers, but just the product involved. She talked of the digital tax. That's one avenue that we've not been taxing as many developing countries. And so you may want to look at how do we expand the broader products or services for which tax is levied. So let me stop there for now, but at least those are the kind of avenues we need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mamiki. Dennis, thank you very much for sharing your insights on this important topic. I think it's been very exciting discussing efficient revenue management with you. Unfortunately, that's all we had time for. To all of you who joined us online, thank you for watching. And if you joined us late, you can always catch the full replay of the show on the TADAT YouTube and LinkedIn channels. It will be rebroadcast there. I have to now wish you a great day further and see you again soon on another episode of the TADAT Coffee Chat. Goodbye.